Hi, this is Bonnie Dean from Chief Left Hand Knits. In this video I would like to demonstrate grafting open stitches on the bottom to cast on stitches on the top side, and this is done in my cross tie capelet, a new pattern, and thanks to Brenda Lavelle at Fido Design and Fiber for the down yarn, the MCN yarn, DK weight shown in this video. Thank you, Brenda. I have performed some of the grafting already, the key points being and I've done it in a contrasting or a darker color so that you can see that the goal is to match the tension of the stitches instead of pulling them tight. And I do want to point out here that grafting open stitches in a cable to a bound off edge with a tight cable at the join is a little tricky, and this is the method that I've come up with for this. These two stitches were grafted one-on-one, and instead of grafting these two stitches underneath that go underneath the cable up here, I've joined them together and then put them under. It looks a little neater. It looks like the natural cable crossing instead of trying to graft one-to-one stockinette stitch to stockinette stitch under the cable. The reference for this is a great reference with my personal edition of the cable crossing modification, and this can be looked at in detail with photos on page 102 of Vogue Knitting, the Ultimate Knitting Guide, edition 2002. That's 2002. In my cross tie capelet pattern, there are 2 reverse stockinette stitches on the edge, followed by 4 stockinette stitches having to do with the cable, and then a reverse stockinette stitch. So to do the edge reverse stockinette stitch, as all reverse stockinette stitch grafting, as demonstrated in Vogue Knitting, you go from back to front or bottom to top, and then you always take 2 bars of the bound off, and then you go from back to front, preferably in the left side of the stitch. I'm not going to tighten that down now. The next stitch is then you do the same thing. On the bottom open stitch, you go from bottom to top or back to front. And then on the top, in the reverse stockinette stitch portion, you take 2 bars. And then you go from bottom to top. For the stockinette stitch portion, you start bottom to top. You go around the entire stockinette stitch at the base. And then here's the difference. You go back through the stitch that on the bottom, the open stitch, from top to bottom, and then the next stitch from bottom to top. So top to bottom on the right stitch, bottom to top on the left stitch. You can see I formed a stockinette stitch there. The next stockinette stitch is here, and I've taken the whole thing. And then you come through from bottom to top of the stitch you were just in, and the next stitch is, top to bottom on the stitch you were just in, and bottom to top on the next stitch. I've completed this one cable, and this was not a tight crossing, so there was no difficulty in grafting 4 stockinette stitches in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4. I've done it with contrast yarn, and I have not pulled those too tight. I next came from bottom to top on the reverse stockinette stitch, 1 stitch portion, and then you need to take 2 bars up here, the next section has a tight cable crossing, and so I'm going to demonstrate this to you. So for the first part of the stockinette, it's bottom to top, go around the entire stockinette stitch at its base, and there's the one right next to the cast on. From top to bottom, bottom to top. The next one is also easy. It is the one laying on top, the cable laying on top. So you take the whole stitch at the base, just like that. And then top to bottom, bottom to top. And here's my trick. So top to bottom, bottom to top. I've got the 3rd stitch in the cable, and I'm also going to put the 4th stitch on the cable as well, and do these 2 stitches together. So it's bottom to top of the last 2 stitches of a tight cable. And then you can just put that together with the stockinette stitch, which is the last stockinette stitch in this cable. Then you would come back bottom to top. Top to bottom, bottom to top. And as you can see, that looks a lot more like a cable than trying to do 4 stockinette stitches in a cable crossing. So I like that better. So in summary, when grafting an open group of stitches to a bound off group of stitches, on the bottom when you're doing reverse stockinette stitch, you always do back to front through all the stitches. When you're on the bottom in stockinette stitch, or the open stitches, you go from front to back in the first stitch and back to front in the second stitch, and go around the base of the whole stitch in the bound off section. And to summarize my trick to make a cable crossing look good when you're grafting stockinette stitch to stockinette stitch, incorporate 2 stitches on the tight under section. Go bottom to top on the ones that you want to tuck under, and then graft that to 1 stitch. And I think that looks better than trying to graft 4 stitches. Happy knitting!